$6 of research grants and contracts. So that becomes a very important criterion when we weigh how we would reduce UGF. So a second option is to distribute the UGF reduction proportionately to the universities. And to statewide, each unit would be reducing into its unique core. We provided at the meeting last Monday more detail at the magnitude at each one of the universities. And again, it was a UGF allocation to each university, and then what UGF goes into major academic units. And the scale of those reductions, again, says, wow, these are huge numbers that would require the elimination of most of the academic enterprise at our universities. So again, I don't believe this is a viable approach to just shrink into one or two colleges at each one of our universities. Simply doesn't save enough money. And I believe while on the upside, it retains our current organizational structure, maintains broad access, and each university would retain its core, no matter how narrow that core would become. And it certainly would involve the reduction of duplicative programs across the state. I think it risks financial viability and accreditation at each one of the universities. I do not believe it addresses effectively inter-university conflict. As some may argue, proportional distribution is not a fair way to distribute the reductions. I think there isn't perfect agreement about what each university's core mission actually is. I think also it would reduce student choice to academic programs and services at each one of our universities. And despite recent progress in coordination and collaboration, there are substantial barriers to coordination and collaboration that still remain. And finally, and most important in my view, it's not a strategic approach that looks at the entire state, since priorities for reduction would largely be set at each university. Another way to look at this is to fit our organizational structure and our academic programs, research programs, student support services, and administration to fit it to the enrollment that we have here at the University of Alaska. And so this approach would be a more integrated approach. It would involve a single accreditation model for delivering higher education to the state that would preserve our core mission at a lower cost. It also builds on the constitutional and legal foundation of a single university and responds to the legislative intent language that is in the budget now, and we have seen over numerous years in the past. It would deliver education through a single college for each major field serving the state. So a college of engineering, education, management, business, etc., along down the line. Through a common curriculum and calendar, course blocks, a common bill, a common transcript, a common application, and other processes that are student-facing. Delivery would be both face-to-face on our university and community campuses across the state, and I think importantly and increasingly online. We've done a tremendous job, I believe, in expanding online offerings, and this is an area that I think we can build on looking forward. Organized research, and I mean that in terms of institutes, and externally funded research would be conducted through research institutes with system-wide scope, as opposed to scope limited to currently a specific one of our universities. And service units would be organized in a similar manner. Now, questions have been raised here about faculty research that's part of their workload and part of their professional responsibility, and that would not be covered by this. This is organized research that's grant and contract funded. Examples of multi-campus university systems with a single accreditation include the University of Washington, Penn State University System, and Kent State University System. And there are others. The University of South Florida right now is in a legislative mandated process of moving from 3 accreditations to 1 accreditation. And that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. Which one? University of South Florida System. So this would be a very high-level picture of what the University of Alaska would look like, with its major components distributed across the state, but integrated within a single university as envisioned by our Constitution and our tax structure and many other.
President Johnson.
Yes.
With the schedule that we have in front of us to make these decisions, and if we choose as a board to move with a new model, how quickly are we going to be able to work with our accrediting body so that we ensure that our students remain whole in the programs that they're enrolled to?
It's a great question. We have already been meeting actively with the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. They are watching, they're paying attention, obviously, and they are extremely supportive of us and always mention their top priority, which fortunately is our top priority, and that is our students and our students' interest in completing their programs through whatever means we can within each university, within the university system, and then even if we're not able to meet them internally through other institutions. So that is constantly their top priority. And I'm looking at Paul Layer here. He's been in those conversations with them, and you can nod or speak about that, but that's absolutely their number one priority that they repeat constantly in our conversations with them. They've also indicated in the context of this consideration of this option, a very strong willingness to work with us on this option given the severe situation we are in.
Mr. Chair, along those lines, has there been discussion with the accreditors with respect to an interim step, a step that we could take, much like what we did with the education teaching at the University of Alaska, Anchorage? I mean, the education is being taught to Anchorage students via UAF's accreditation. Has that type of I can see that our movement, if we did this, I mean, the first step might be utilizing the various universities' accreditations, present accreditation.
That's exactly correct. And depending upon your input today, we will get with them again this week and then begin evaluating that process. They've indicated very strong support for expediting their review processes for us. So that was very good to hear. They were talking about a matter of single-digit months. I think we need to take our time here and make sure we're going to get it right. But it's very likely that we would borrow or use one of our existing institutional accreditations as the basis for the accreditation of the system. And so it's a matter of which one would be the best one, and then we would do what's called a substantive change process to that existing accreditation. So it wouldn't be making up an accreditation out of whole cloth. It would be basically building upon one of the three accreditations that we currently have.
That process, Mr. President, by building on one of the universities that we already have, that does not mean that that university, that accreditation can't be supplemented in effect when you're talking about like engineering. Well, we have two different engineering programs at two different universities, and if we just used one of their accreditations, it doesn't mean that obviously that program wouldn't be also taught at the other schools. I mean, in other words, what I'm trying to say is, to me, there's a difference between how we go about accreditation and, in effect, how you put together the different colleges with the deans and the faculty.
That's true. And I think it's important to note as well, again, the difference relationship between but the difference between institutional accreditation and program accreditation. So, for example, at the University of Washington, while it's a single institutional accreditation, their engineering schools have their own programmatic accreditation at 2 of the campuses. So that's something we can determine ourselves, but obviously ensuring that if we have a single college of engineering or whatever it might be, that it maintains the program accreditations that are critical for our students, whether that's a voluntary accreditation or whether that's a mandatory accreditation, which of course is the case for education here in Alaska.
Thank you.
Another question over here.
Yep.
Thank you. So in all the discussions with individuals over the last couple of weeks, one of the other options that has been presented is that because we already have the existing systems in place, that we keep the 3 campuses and make them the major administrative units, and then have statewide be providing support services. So it would be where the chancellors would have the authority at their campuses to, and within their system, to take the leads, and then they would coordinate amongst the 3 campuses. Was that an option that you looked at?
I think it is it's not a feasible option in that you still have to have the governance roles that statewide performs, and you still have to have the administrative services that statewide provides. And those are the 2 functions that statewide provides to the university. Now, over the last several years, in response to external reports, Fisher, McTaggart, Rogers, for example, we got out of the business at statewide of running programs. Those are out of statewide at this point. So if you did eliminate or severely reduce statewide, you're going to have to add cost at the 3 universities to perform those functions. It's not like statewide doesn't do things on behalf of the universities. And so all of those functions would have to be performed. So you're actually not, I don't believe, saving any money. And I think in addition to that, you're adding a lot of complexity. And you are, as a board, losing a significant capacity in terms of taking a statewide and strategic view as to how you're going to meet Alaska's higher education needs. And I think you also don't resolve effectively the significant inter-university conflict. And I commend our chancellors and provosts and vice chancellors and others for working together, I think, very actively. But I think you've seen recently, in light of our serious fiscal uncertainty and a lack of a long-term plan that will organize the university within that economic envelope, you've seen a lot of internecine conflict. And that internecine conflict, I would predict, will continue, in fact, probably increase without some countervailing centripetal force.
I agree that there probably is going to be a little bit of conflict between campuses, both within a campus and the community colleges fighting with the main campus. But I know that there are other states that have gone through this process, and based on what we have to do in the next 6 months to get ready and reorganize, do you have the time to actually focus on consolidating and everything, making one university, a new UAA as you proposed here?
I think we can develop the first step of a plan for your review next Tuesday, and we can build that out over the August period to bring you a more finely developed plan at your September meeting. Also, August, there's a timeline later in the deck that would lay out where and when public and other stakeholder input, faculty, staff, students would be planned. so that by the time you're asked to make a specific decision in early September, it would be with the benefit of that consultation and that input. Unfortunately, we're working against the clock here, and you're very familiar with the time problem that we have before us. And unless serious decisions about what our structure and what programs we will be offering are made in September, we will not be able to provide notice to faculty and staff in October, and we will not be able to implement changes in January in the next semester. So when we're trying to position ourselves so that we're in a new, more cost-effective structure in January, and then back into where we are today in order to schedule the decisions that would need to be made, and also incorporate as much as we can input from the various internal and external stakeholders.
Jim Purdue.
I got so much to say, and I'm trying to limit what I'm not to wander around. On Regent Parker's point, and there have been people who smart people who've recommended that we go in the opposite direction, the decentralized direction, which I guess would necessitate the board being the integrator. Because we would have at least three reports potentially to the board. Basically, no president and 3 chancellors, something like that, with each having their own advisory boards potentially. I just can't get my mind around it. I just feel like the Constitution and the original concept of the university was an integrated state university. And I think about the complexity of having the board try to manage that situation. I do think the second option, the option of the MAUs looking at their cuts and how they would manage them, is something the board needs to see. And we do need to understand how the chancellors would execute these activities. I realize that also creates a lot of anxiety as well, but it is important to get a full understanding of the second option by looking at some of those dynamics, in my opinion. On the third option, it's also hard to get your mind around it. I can understand the consolidation of administration. I'm familiar with the healthcare industry where a lot of the regional hospitals and health systems are matrix managed, where the administration is really centralized to streamline costs and purchasing and so on. But the care and the governance of the physicians and so on is done locally. So I'm intrigued by it, but I also feel I have numerous questions, and the major question is, how will we save the money? How do we save the money in this option? So those are some of my thoughts.
Oh, it's a great question. Like the healthcare industry, we would seek to consolidate administrative services and functions. And like in the healthcare industry, we would seek to have the providers with the students, wherever those students are. Maybe I'm stretching the metaphor a little bit here, but just because a physician is in one place or another place doesn't mean the physician would practice in a different way or use different forms or prescribe different medications or whatever it is. They would be doing so consistent with the best practice, obviously, in the field, and also with the processes that have been set out for delivery of healthcare services in that organization, whether it's in a particular location or whether it's distributed across a large region. With respect to how the money gets saved, it gets saved by the reduction of, unfortunately, people, largely. And so what we would need to do, basically, is start with our enrollment. We have just 27,000 students across the entire University of Alaska system. That's about University of Washington. And we need to back in then to, well, what are their majors? Where are they? How do we organize ourselves, and how do we resource that organization to meet those students' needs? as opposed to thinking about everything in the context of our current organizational structure and paring it down. And I think that the other way to look at it is start with, if you will, crass term, start with the market, start with demand, and then back into how it is we can best and most cost effectively meet those market interests and market needs. If that involves physical faculty in a particular location, that's it. But given this huge reduction, the only way to meet these very, very large numbers is to reduce cost as much as we can, and the large portion of our cost, unfortunately, well, fortunately, because we're a people organization and our people deliver tremendous value, but that's where our cost is too. So we would need to reduce cost administratively, and we would need to reduce cost at the front line as well, particularly in faculty. Hate to say it, though I do.
Regent Neal.
So, knowing all of the various dynamics of option 2 and 3, how do we keep our students most whole? And my question is, I think going back to what you were talking about, is changing the paradigm of our thinking. Rather than thinking of the university we have today, how do we create a new model that truly serves the students first?
Well, if we looked at option 2, and let's imagine that one of our universities decides to stop teaching in an area that is that needs to be done face-to-face, but they decide to stop doing that, those students would have no access in that location to that education, to those degrees that would be provided there. Whereas if we looked at it from an option 3 standpoint, and we looked across and decided that based on enrollments in a particular location, that obviously we need fill in the blank healthcare education there, engineering education there, education in the arts in that location, then we would organize ourselves to make sure that that demand was met in that location. Whether that demand is met through faculty who are employed at one university or another, I don't think matters as much as that the demand is being met by qualified faculty teaching in accredited programs, whether whatever the mascot's name might be or whatever the colors on the diploma might be.
And before we move on, my other question is, as Karen suggested, is really taking a deep look at option 2. Are you suggesting then, if we do that and leave the current structure in place, that we would continue to operate 2 engineering programs as the structure currently calls for? So that's what it's my question.
Well, that would be a decision strongly informed by the chancellors. I believe, based on the discussions, numerous discussions I've already had with the chancellors about how they might contract into their core. I would say in that particular case, yes, there would continue to be, in that case, 2 schools of engineering.
Regent Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am curious to hear from the people. I would like a survey to go out to everyone who works for the university and all the students and see what they want us to hear, because we're not hearing from everybody. We're just hearing from the people who email us and call us. But I would like a survey to be sent out to hear directly from each individual which direction they want us to take. And I'd like to hear from the chancellors. We didn't hear from them at the last meeting, and I think that was a miss.
To, if I may respond, Regent Garrett, that's a good suggestion, and we've already engaged a survey expert to conduct a multi-stakeholder survey over the course of the August timeframe, so that when you get to the place in early September of making serious programmatic decisions, that you will have not just the input from those who are highly motivated to give you input. You would have a much more valid basis from a constructed instrument to inform you.
Thank you.
Greta?
Thank you. Thank you. And I know you're almost to the end of your presentation, but I think we're kind of in the discussion
Yes, absolutely.
phase right now. And I support what Karen is suggesting for our options. And it would be nice if we had the luxury of having time to plan for this. In the material that you provided previously, where we had incremental cuts and what our options might be, I think we need to do this similar type of an exercise moving forward with this, the worst case scenario, because I don't think we really have a lot of options in that scenario. I think it's just a matter of crisis management and dealing with this impact. But I really feel like we need to be transparent. We need to be as inclusive as possible. But the reality is these cuts will have to be made, and we have to do them. I again will say I still have hope that it will be less impactful than what we're currently looking at. But I feel like as we're looking at what the new university will be, we have to look at how we can think outside of the box. And so you're looking at these other university structures, you're looking at Arizona and their online programs, but also our assets, our real estate and our land. Mm-hmm. And I feel like because of the outrage that the community has shown about this situation, that we have an opportunity to use that momentum to get some legislative changes made so that this type of a cut can't happen in the future, that there's either a law or there's a constitutional amendment about the severity that an administration can come in and harm the university in this manner. I also feel like the federal delegation certainly has an opportunity to look at ways to deal with our land situation that we've been talking about for so long. And, as a public university, that's what it means. The state supports it. And the federal opportunity to get that just land settlement for the university is maybe more real today. And so I know we're really focusing on the structure and how we're going to absorb these cuts, but at the same time, how are we going to bring more money in? How are we going to look at tuition? How are we going to look at being able to shift and pivot and bring more money into the university if possible, using this outrageous situation to our benefit?
Well, Regent Beretta, that's the trick. Exactly right. So how do we get ourselves in that position as quickly as possible? On the land grant front, there's a little bit of hope on that front, but it's going to be a decade out before we probably receive any real revenue from that. We are seriously looking at, again, how we can monetize and have turned up our work on monetizing some of our large facilities. Frequently, though, or in many of those cases, they're burdened by debt. And so the actual benefit to us financially would be less than it would be if we didn't have that debt on those facilities, but we are looking at that as well right now. This is a time, given the severity of this cut, that everything has to be on the table.
Regent Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, I know you've given us some of the numbers in the past, but I think that because this is a situation that none of us would have wished to be in, I think that, I don't know if the numbers are necessary for the polling, but certainly having a set amount of money that is dwindling each day and knowing how much money each of these alternatives 2 and 3 would allow us to shrink, that's important, because I think that as some of us have kind of figured out some of the math, and even if we do as much as everybody thinks we should do, we still have a delta. And that's the problem. We don't have the luxury of saying, what's our university going to be like? And this is how we'd love it, because we'd all love to do that. But unfortunately, in a very short time, we have to spend less money, and we have to also provide excellence of education for Alaskans. And that is a huge undertaking. And I'm thinking that dollars associated, particularly since we already have enrollment, where students are, what programs they're in, what programs cost what money, those types of things would be, I know you're going to bring them to us, but I think they're very, very important for everyone in Alaska to understand, because we are money bound right now, and our money, it's like being on a little raft of money, and it's shrinking every day. And we really do have to think about how we service Alaskans, but also educate our people that come, both traditional students and non-traditional students, and make sure our presence is felt in all of the locations where we now have the university, making sure that the university is still a huge part of all of our communities. And that's the thing that I think is, from an Alaskan standpoint, we're a huge state with very few people, and that's the part that probably is the trickiest, particularly because of our financial status.
If I might, Regent Hughes, good points. All three of these options allow us to cut. All three of these options allow us to shrink. It's just a matter of whether we're doing it gradually or via amputation, essentially. It's that simple, really. I think the key question that I think you really hit on very, very well, it's how we shrink and how we look and how we effectively serve our mission at the end of this shrinking process. That's key. But we can save the money closing campuses, and we can save the money by shrinking each one of the campuses within our current university structure, or we can re-envision how we serve the state's higher education needs.
Yeah, I have Parker, Vanya, and O'Neill.
You got Parker as well.
I was just going to say, based on the three options that the president has identified right now, like Regent O'Neill and Regent Perdue, I like the option two. I think the chancellors and the provosts working with the president will be easy for them to develop a plan that does look at, based on our reduced budget, something that can be pulled together and that is focused on the students. And so I like the option too.
Regent Vanya.
Having been involved in two different situations similar to this, although on a much smaller scale, going along with what the Regents Beretta and Hughes have brought up, this is all about money, period. And we have some numbers. We received the report from OMB, and we have our people who work in the finances at the university. At the same time, I think we would be remiss in not, and this is no reflection upon them, please believe me, but when I was involved in these situations before, one of the first things I did was to have an independent audit so we leave no stone unturned. And I have the feeling that perhaps we should do that now. It actually could take the heat somewhat off of the financial department here and perhaps give them some assistance. So I believe, of course, if everyone were to agree to that, that's a step that we should take.
If I may, Regent, we are independently audited every year. And we present that financial statement to the board. And or are you thinking about a plan? So have some outside folks come in and give us a plan?
No,
or is
nothing
it because
that
we are
expensive.
audited?
Just to make sure that, and when, how recently was that done?
Myron?
The last report was presented to the board in November, but the audit is completed every fall.
Okay.
So we're under the process now of having another audit done, which will be done by fall. Okay, so O'Neill, Regent O'Neill, and
Just to clarify Regent Parker's statement, as we've been talking through option 2 and 3, I think it is wise to make sure that we, see numbers for both options. As Regent Barreto was talking about transparency, but I am also thoughtful of the time and energy that it takes. But I think at the Board of Regents, we should require that. But what gets me excited in this, very challenging time is to really think about how we create a new model of serving the students within the university system based on today's reality and what tomorrow is going to look like. And I know that the president has started this process through World Build, and I believe that's really important to us as a educational institution, because most of our educational institutions in this country are far behind where they should be. In the sense of utilizing digital technology and really understanding the relevancy of how we build the workforce for the next 2, 5, 10 years. And so most universities are not facing this kind of fiscal crisis that we are, but this could actually be used as an opportunity. So I just want to be really clear that that's where I see the real opportunity and future for the university is in creating a new model. Thank you.
thank you. I had Regent Parker and then Barreto. I'm Purdue, I'm sorry.
I wish I could be
A little short on sleep tonight. I
mistaken
apologize.
for Lisa Parker. The option that I'm somewhat toying with is 2B or 3 is something between 2 and 3 in the sense if we were to receive some support from the state in this next time frame that we're doing our options, could we look at centralizing our administration and trying to more gently look at our academics, because that is where the students are meeting, that's where the faculty are meeting the students. So centralizing our business processes more and taking our savings in that regard. And I think of the School of Engineering, 2 schools of engineering. I think that's a pretty simplistic solution to have 1 school of engineering if we're thinking it's going to save us a lot of money. We have a lot of students. We have a lot of great students. So would we just be eliminating a dean? Would we expect all the students to go to 1 campus?
No.
I'd like to take some time and think about that. So I understand at 136 million, there are certain decisions that we have to make that are cataclysmic, but I think if we do have a graduated approach, that would be a thought I would have, is that we don't take the simplistic idea in the academic areas, that we try to, and I'm saying this as a person who helped the university develop a very good, I think, health delivery system that is all over the state, but centralized in one place. I still think that there are huge questions there, and they involve another set of accreditation as well. So those are just my off-the-top thoughts at this time.
Well, thank you. And I certainly plan to move on the administrative side quickly. I think that's essential, but there isn't the money there. There is some money there, no question about it. The big money is across our university system. Unfortunately, it's in people. And so you're right, with consolidation of two colleges, you certainly would save some money in terms of upper level administration, but the real savings will be in frankly, a considerably higher student-faculty ratio than we currently have. And we've looked at those numbers across the state system and compared ourselves to other states. And to some extent, we're comparable to other states. In other cases, we're not. But in terms of the on average statewide student-faculty ratios, we need a whole lot more students, basically, to warrant the faculty numbers that we have across the system. And that's a painful thing to say, but that is the case. So.
Beretta.
Thank you. Just in response to Regent Banya's question about more financial information and an auditor, we can convene, I chair the audit committee, we can convene a meeting, and because we're in the process right now of our external auditors, and it may be really helpful for regents to participate in that and have a deeper dive into the finances so we can look more closely and be more familiar with what we're talking about. And so I think in this timeline that we're up against, within the next couple of weeks, I think we need to really focus on the messaging that, you know, we're communicating right now, because I'll guarantee you that people are just in fear that their lives are going to be affected, and what do they do? And I think the sooner that we can have some clear information about what the timeline is, you know, what those, how we're going to deal with people, because there's different ways of dealing with people, the human aspect of it, and where they're at within their individual situation. And so I'm hopeful that as we have these meetings that are going to take place with organizing these plans and deciding this direction, that we really keep at the forefront that we care about our people, and that we're doing everything in our power to be able to address their situations, but we have to take action, and we have to do it swiftly, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible. So I just wanted to put it out there that we can call a audit committee meeting and get the external auditors in there if we wanted to have them focus on specific information, and working with Myron to provide that information to regents to better understand where we're at.
Regent Hargreaves.
Mr. Chairman, how much does the statewide administration change from one scenario to the next? Is there any change by the scenario alternative?
In all three scenarios, it would shrink. It would shrink under scenario one because there would be fewer universities and fewer people to serve. I would note for the record that statewide has already taken a reduction twice the system-wide average, twice. So just for the record, over the last several years, that's been the case. In any case, under option one, it would definitely shrink. Under option two, it would shrink proportionately, at least under this model, right? Again, it would have fewer people. It wouldn't have fewer organizations necessarily to serve, but it would have a smaller university to serve. So its reduction would be, I think it was something like $8 million of its $18 million UGF. So almost half of its UGF would be reduced. And of course, that's the case for the other three universities, right? They would also have their UGF reduced by 41% under option two. And under option three, essentially statewide goes away in that it becomes the University of Alaska. There wouldn't, under option three, be three separate universities with their administrations and a separate statewide administration. There would be a single administration for the University of Alaska system under that model.
And Mr. Chairman, we've heard on occasion that the statewide administration does thus and so, but I feel like that I've never seen a full list of what exactly the statewide administration does. If it's possible, I'd like to see a list of the total responsibilities and what district-wide administration cost.
We would be happy to provide that.
Does. And then to get a current figure on this year's budget of the cost of statewide administration. Have you published that? Have you told us?
Absolutely. We provided detail on statewide administration, UGF and DGF, et cetera, at your last couple of meetings, but we're happy to bring that back.
What was the total?
The UGF, so the state funds going to statewide, $18 million last year.
Yes,
and roughly all in, including other funds, $55 million. So it's ballpark 6-7% either of UGF, if you just look at us as a percentage of UGF, and it's about the same percentage if you take all funds at statewide as a percentage of all funds across the university system.
Thank you.
Garrett. Oh, I'm sorry. And then I've got Parker.
Thank you. Again, I'd like to hear from our chancellors. Are they in favor of one or the other at this point?
Please feel free to ask them.
I'm asking the chancellors. Whoever would like to go first.
Chancellor White.
This is Chancellor Sandine. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, go ahead, Chancellor Sandine.
It's okay. I can defer to Dan and then go next.
Okay, then, Chancellor White.
Well, thanks. I mean, I guess I think you do need to choose. I think there's a couple of choices. The new UA choice and I think Regent Perdue referred to a decentralized choice. I think we've got a challenge currently. Of course, the number one, the very first thing in the accreditation standards is that the CEO report to the board. We don't meet that. We never have. And I think under the new UA model, the CEO would report of an accredited university of accredited UA would report to the board. And then the other model of a decentralized model, the CEOs of the universities, UAF, UAA, and UAS would report to the board, or could report to the board in a scenario that I think we've not envisioned, or at least not contemplated at this point. I think the challenge that we've got currently with our current situation is that you, the board, are separated from the university, from some information at the universities. I think that's probably a challenge, and the reason that the accreditation standard is that CEOs report to the board, whether it's in Model 3 or Model 2 or some other model. I do think that there are decisions that we're not making now that need to be made because we don't have decision on structure. So I do think the structure needs to be decided. I do think that the 1 versus 3 discussion, the tension between 1 and 3, does create inefficiency, whether we're 1 university or 3. And I think that's a question of oneness versus oneness and sameness versus what is seamless, and whether it's important to be 1 or whether it's important to be 3. And I think about in the state, we still have municipalities. The municipalities still have their administration. We have a state administration. The federal administration in Washington, D.C., we still have states and states administrations. I've done lots of jobs at UAF. I started as a term assistant faculty, as a term faculty. I was a tenured faculty, a department chair, a unit director, a research lead. associate vice chancellor, interim vice chancellor. I've been the vice president and the chancellor. And I think, one of the things that I see is opportunity for entrepreneurism. And I think one thing that sameness does is reduces our ability for entrepreneurialism on our campuses. And I think one example is tuition. UAF is way below our peers in tuition. Our peers are research universities across the country. Our CTC, our community college, is way above, and our research university is way below. So I think that presents a challenge. There's more revenue out there, in my opinion, for UAF, given some flexibility. I personally think that people deserve choice. I want choice. I, as a donor, want choice in what I give to. There are 230,000 people that live in Boise, Idaho. There are 22 separate universities that operate in Boise because people want choice, I think. I also think that competition drives innovation, and it drives companies to get leaner, because if they're competing for, whether it's for students, whether we're competing in Alaska or competing outside of Alaska. UAF's research competitors are University of Washington. We need to be able to compete with them. I think this question of, would somebody stop doing something, and is there a risk of the University of Alaska Fairbanks or University of Alaska Anchorage stopping doing something? There's lots of things we don't do already. There's no law school here. There's no med school. There's no school of architecture. So, I think if there were a decentralized model and the universities were competing with each other, and without outside universities, it would be a market decision. The market would decide that for the number of law students, there isn't a law school here. I think that during strategic pathways, both the Anchorage and Fairbanks communities said we want a school of business and we want a school of engineering. And if there's the market to support those two, then they would both exist. So I do think you need to choose. I do think that there's two models. I think certainly the UA model and a decentralized model that would allow the universities in their current existence to kind of pursue the pathways that they're on. So thank you.
Thank you. Chancellor Sandine.
Yes, can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Thanks.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. And I do agree with what Chancellor White has stated. I think he makes some real excellent points. So I won't reiterate those. I'll go in a slightly different direction. So as you know, I have experience as a chancellor in another state, Wisconsin, that went through almost a severe reduction in state funding to its university system. And at that time, according to the institution that I led and with input from faculty, staff, and community members, we decided on a centralization approach. So we took separate universities and we centralized them. And that was the right solution for that place at that time. So I'm not a person who's against centralization. I have deployed that method myself in the past. However, when I look at the options before us and when I look at the speed by which we need to implement reductions, I think option 2 will allow us to do that more quickly. At UAA, we've already implemented at least $3.8 million in reductions since February when the governor first announced his budget, because I knew from my past experience that we were going to get a cut of some size. And there's no time like the present to start making cuts. Some of them you are well aware of. We talked about the Chugiak, Eagle River facility, my decision to not renew that lease. We talked about moving hockey from the Sullivan Arena back to campus. We've also reduced at least a minimum of $500,000 in administrative staff positions, probably more, now that people are resigning and we're not filling those positions. In addition, we have eliminated, or we gave notice to term faculty in many of our colleges and assigned that teaching load to our tenure and tenure track faculty instead. I've issued a directive to all of our academic units to increase credit hour production per faculty member. So in essence, faculty are teaching more. So we've implemented many, many things already since February. In addition, we have started to have conversations, and we have collected data that will help inform program reduction or disestablishment decisions should that become necessary. We've proposed some major criteria. Our academic deans are looking at those along with the provost and cabinet. And as of last week, we brought in shared governance into that conversation. So we are well along the way of being able to make additional reductions very, very quickly. As soon as you give us that direction and you give us the number that we're aiming for, we will work toward it, and we can do it very quickly. The question of a major reorganization of the university, that may be valid, but I don't think it will necessarily reap us immediate savings as if you delegate it to the chancellors. Already, the chancellors and provosts had one phone conversation where we talked about coordinating program elimination, so we're not all eliminating the same thing, and that nothing will be available in Alaska, although, as Dan said, that may occur in some disciplines. So we are working diligently to move toward reductions, and I think that gives us time to analyze a major structural change, and I think it's the quickest path forward to meeting these reductions. The other thing I'd like to point out is President Johnson pointed out that there are some groups of universities, not necessarily systems, that are going for one accreditation. For example, Kent State University is a single university with multi-campuses. But there is a trend in some areas for consolidation, but there's also a trend for decentralization. And I suggest that you take a look at the state of Oregon higher education system. They disestablished their statewide system and went to a separate university structure. So these are major decisions for you to make. And I really hope that you will take advantage of all the information that is available to you in making these decisions. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Chancellor Caulfield?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. Are you able to hear me well enough?
We are, thanks.
Right. Well, first of all, I appreciate the difficult decisions you've had to make during this meeting. I think we're all feeling that. And I share many of the comments that my colleagues have already shared. I do think that a careful look at the second and the third options is warranted. And I would echo what Chancellor Sandeen just said about taking the time that we have available to us to look at perhaps even other models that strike the right balance between consolidation and retaining some level of distributed programs and services. And as I see it, that is the tension that we're facing here, the necessary cost reductions and efficiencies of consolidating and streamlining what we offer across the state. And yet, as we all know, Alaska is a huge state with distinctive regional needs. And I try to wrap my mind around what a single University of Alaska with single colleges across the system will look like, and what the governing structures would look like that would still address the distinctive regional needs across our great state and avoid having all the decisions being made in only one place, or at least not well informed, because it's a process that doesn't have good information about the distinct regional needs across our state. So I think that's one of my foremost concerns is, what is the model that accomplishes the cost reductions and the necessary efficiencies, and yet also has a governance structure that can take the distinctive regional needs at the campus level, at the community, the regional level into account. And I think about a single faculty senate, for example, or a single staff council for all of Alaska. And how do we devise structures to ensure that the distinctive needs of our very large state can be taken into account? So I think, we just, as chancellors working with the president, need to roll our sleeves up and really look closely at this. We all know that we're under great time pressure here, but I think taking the time to strike that right balance, as others have said, this is really a momentous decision that we are looking at, the board will be faced with. And so giving you our best thinking and the best models that we think are important for the board to consider is, what I'm committed to, and I know the others are as well. So I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you very much. President Johnson.
Well, thanks very much. And thank you, chancellors, for your input. Just a couple of points here. Chancellor White is absolutely correct that the accreditation standards require that the CEO of a covered institution report to the board. But there is also a standard that says that for institutions in systems that don't report to the board, that's okay as long as the roles are clear and that resources are distributed in an equitable manner. So it allows for the structure that we currently have. Otherwise, none of our institutions would be accredited, but for that exception. The second point, I think, and the chancellors did a nice job, I think, of describing the importance of having local perspective and ground truth and full information. But I just want to remind you of the numbers we're talking about. At UAA, in year, if we don't have an impact on tuition, and we were able to implement on July 1, we'd be looking at a $47 million in-year UGF reduction. At UAF, we'd be looking at $67 million. And again, that doesn't assume any negative impact on tuition or research grants and contracts, and it assumes that we were able to implement the changes 3 weeks ago. And at UAS, it would be $10 million. Again, without any tuition impact, and it assumes that we were able to implement the reductions 3 weeks ago. And of course, what we're looking to do here is try to preserve as much as we can in terms of our academic enterprise this fall and implement the big chunk reductions effective January, which means that the effective number we have to hit for the rest of the year is double the numbers I just talked about. So this is a very, very severe situation, and I appreciate and support taking our time and going through the due deliberation here. But there's a very serious fiscal reality that we must keep in mind. Thank you.
Regent O'Neill.
Quick question as I've been going through the presentation. And before we move off of this, President Johnson, could you speak a little bit to slide 21, please?
Thank you, Regent O'Neill. This just gives an example. This isn't complete, but it's largely so. But this would just give you an example of simplification just on the academic side. It doesn't touch on research. It doesn't touch on student support services or the community campuses, but it gives you an idea of the simplification that could take place. If we were to, and maybe this could happen under option 2, where those organizations on the right-hand side here were allocated or assigned to a particular university, or they could be organized under a single University of Alaska. But you can, I think, readily see the degree of simplification that is possible here. And I think that this kind of structural perspective also applies to the research enterprise, to our outreach student support units, and of course to our community campuses. So that is my presentation. We've had very, very good discussion, and I appreciate the questions that have been raised, to the requests for additional information that have been made, and we're happy to get straight to work on that, including financial look at options 2 and 3, and our plan would be to come back to you on the 30th, so it's very quick. With that detailed information. There's a timeline here on slide 24. I'm sorry, 23 is sort of a big picture timeline over the next year, basically, what we would be doing over that period of time. But this slide in particular has us coming back to you, and I know it's fast, but it comes back to you. Ideally, we would have the budget distribution for board approval. And it doesn't, I still have hope, but my hope, even as late as this morning, was dashed once again by the indecision in Juneau. So we would be coming to you with a proposed UA structure for your consideration and approval as of the 30th. Then move into a very rigorous public input process over the August to September timeframe. That's beneficial because we have more of our students and more of our faculty back on the campuses. And then we would at that time be making the detailed plans over that period, and then come to you for decision again in September on the structure, and then actual program reductions and program discontinuations. And I know this sounds crazy, but we need to come to you for review of the 2021 budget. And that's something we always do in September. Then in November, we would be looking at the budget request. And of course, we would be implementing in that time period between September and November, so that we could have the effective date of the actual personnel decisions that are being made through this very fast time schedule here, so that we could get those made and have them effective by the end of this calendar year. Otherwise, if we start pushing things out, it just compounds the cost more and more and more. Terrible situation we're in, but I think we can move through it. But it's going to be a bumpy road, and we'll be going at speed.
Mr. Chairman, given the circumstance with respect to FY20, is it possible for us to, we have meetings and then we don't have the budget. Is it possible to be more flexible? Because given the circumstance right now, even if something occurred, we're not all the way through the process. In essence, and of course, new bills are being drafted and proposed, and it looks like this is really going to be a several-week process, if at all.
Yep.
And so, and I'm not saying that. I guess from a standpoint of the UA structure. That could be done even like the first part of August. I guess maybe that should be done next week. Maybe, but I just think that this whole approval, I'm not even sure.
Yeah, well,
we're going to get it.
The dilemma is that we don't know, and that
right.
The process can continue to unfold for quite some time if there's a budget that gets passed and there's not 45 support for it, and you get another veto, and then another possible session to override that veto,
exactly.
And this can string out quite a bit. So I think we're unfortunately in the position of planning for the worst and hoping for the best. And as we move down this planning process, if we get better news, I think we can always make mid-course corrections. But if we do it the other way around, we can't. If we keep putting off making decisions, then we put off the end date where we just can't get there. So I think that this is a devastating schedule. But I think unfortunately it's if we go any later than that, it just gets worse. So I think I would like to try to stick to this schedule and work through this. You know, we need to be giving the president some direction. We need to get to a point where we can make a decision, and we have to, you know, I think we have to pretty much follow this time frame, or we're going to be. We may bump up against that February time, which we don't want to see.
I understand, and I'm, of course, you know, we're also thinking about the 2021 budget too. But even without our approval, the president and his personnel are utilizing that money in the way they see fit, right?